My name is Michael O'Neill, and I'm a legislative counsel at the American Bar Association, and I want to welcome you to the 2021 ABA Day. This panel today will be a candid and in-depth discussion on the best ways to lobby and advocate for all the causes that we're interested in. Now I'm just going to introduce our guests. First up, because ladies first, is Leslie Shedd, who currently serves as the communications director for the Republican Congressman Michael McCaul, who serves as the ranking member on the House Foreign Affairs Committee. As countless reporters can attest to, Leslie's grace and southern charm are complemented by her fiercely polite tongue lashings and demand for retractions. Next up is also another Capitol Hill veteran, Yuri Beckelman, who recently was appointed to be the staff director of the new Select Committee on the Modernization of Congress, chaired by Congressman Derek Kilmer from Washington State. Yuri can always be found at the vanguard of any avant-garde movement, whether it's related to fashion, gastronomy, or any other hipster trend. This will be followed by Kurt Bardella, who also served as a chief spokesman on Capitol Hill before becoming a frequent commentator on programs such as Morning Joe or gracing the pages of the LA Times with his political insight. He also founded The Morning Hangover, which is the top country music tip sheet read by Nashville luminaries each morning. The length of Kurt's resume is only exceeded by the breadth of his ego. And finally, we have Scott Tranter, who, yes, is yet another Capitol Hill veteran before going on to found Optimist, which is one of the most distinguished and successful data analytic firms that's been retained by US presidential candidates, in addition to even other global heads of state. As one would expect, Scott enjoys the finer things in life, such as the McDonald's McRib. So to kick things off, again, ladies first. Leslie, you've been around here a long time. In all honesty, what is the one main thing that you would say that most people miss when they go in to lobby their member of Congress?
I think the biggest thing that people kind of think is that they should have a one-size-fits-all conversation, when in reality, you need to make sure that you go in, with specific data about your member's district, making sure that, you have like good information about what committees he or she is on. That really makes a big difference, when you're in there talking to, the member and trying to, I'm so sorry, somebody's like knocking on the door here. But I think that that's really like most important thing that a lot of people don't think about. They come in like specifically focused on a piece of legislation that matters to them or matters to their company or matters to their industry, but it really needs to be tailored as to why and how this matters to that specific member.
That's fair. I mean, Yuri, you've been around the block too. Any other insights on that?
Well, yeah, it's the ask. The meetings that are unsuccessful either don't have an ask or have way too many asks. You have to have a specific set of asks. You got to get to them really quickly, and you got to provide a value proposal for that office about why it matters. And that's what Leslie's talking about. She's saying that this matters to you and your boss and your district because this many people are employed, or this industry is impacted, or this university would receive grant funding, right? That is the value proposal. But if you come in, with 30 asks, or you just come in asking for a meet and greet, like, we're busy people, and if you don't ask us, we won't follow up because we have other things to do. And if you ask us too many things, it just kind of goes in the drawer because we don't have any time to follow up on it.
Yeah, I would completely agree with that. In the Marine Corps, they say if you try to defend everywhere, you defend nowhere. And coming in with 15 different priorities means you don't really have a single priority. And also, yes, staffers' time is incredibly busy. Kurt, would you mind just going into how does the actual news cycle truly affect legislation?
Well, I always am fond of the saying that Washington does two things well: nothing and overreact. And so if you are coming in to lobby for a particular issue, you need to understand that, one, this might be the most important thing in your world. It is likely at best the 72nd thing that is on our actual mind that day. So you need to be aware of what is going on outside of your own ecosystem. You need to know what's actually driving the broader conversation that day, whether it's in committee hearings that the member you're talking to is on, whether it's legislation that might be on the floor that day, whether it's an unexpected thing that happens from a natural disaster to a shooting to whatever, that's going to take over the entire political conversation. When you have these meetings, your job is to try to find a reason to get your member and their staff to a yes on whatever that ask is, assuming that you know what that is, as you already talked about. The reason why people say yes is because it's either A, good politics back home, B, good politics in Washington for them, or C, it's good PR and good press. And I think a lot of times people come into these things completely unaware or not thinking about the PR media side of these things. They're so engrossed in their issue. They're so fixated on the details and the policy and the details and the facts. But at the end of the day, if there isn't a good PR rationale to do something, or there isn't a PR gain to be made, it makes it a lot harder to get it done. You want to give incentives. You want to give the member something that is going to make them look good, either to their constituency or to the press or to their colleagues in DC. And being in tune with the media cycle and being in tune with that timing is really important. A lot of associations, when they come in the lobby, they kind of have a set calendar. Every year, they come in and do their fly-in days at the same times. They do their same myriad of issues, and it gets very cyclical and very redundant. But sometimes issues happen that make something that might be a priority item for you in September very applicable and timely in March. So as an association, you also want to have the ability to be nimble and react to that. If an incident happens where a sitting judge gets threatened, or a person that comes to their home and shoots them or their family, there might be an action item that fits perfectly within the legislative agenda of the American Bar Association to seize on that moment, take action, get visibility. And that is a meeting that every office is going to give you, and give you more importance and visibility than if you did that a year later.
Anybody else want to expound upon that?
Well, sorry, I know I already spoke, but I would just say, like, I completely agree with Kurt on this. I mean, I think that, you know, he really hit the nail on the head, which is that it really matters what is going on right now. And that affects people. I can tell you right now, my congressman is completely obsessed with what is happening on the border. And that's what the news is all about. So if there are, you know, if you have any kind of like an issue that touches on that, now would be a great time, even if it doesn't necessarily flow with whatever calendar, you know, and plan that you had in place. I tell my boss this all the time too, like, we don't make the news. We need to be nimble and be ready to react to it when it happens. And the same should be true with everyone else.
Yeah.
Because members care.
One thing to add to that, at least from my perspective, which is I spend a lot of my time trying to understand what the public thinks and then packaging it in a way for associations like ABA. So when they go talk to members of Congress or people in the Senate, they've got some relevancy. And the perfect example is this is we did a project last year for an organization that wanted to push climate change, but talk about it from a conservative point of view. And so what they wanted to understand is when they went and talked to a member of Congress in, say, South Florida versus a member of Congress in, say, the Gulf in Texas, what was it about? And so it was really about flood insurance at that point. So that when they walk into that meeting, they can talk about, okay, these are how many people who live in a floodplain. This is what these people think about flood insurance. And then this is why it matters to their district. Because, you know, as Kurt and Yuri and Leslie said, a lot of it is what are their top 100 things of the day? Your thing might be 72. But when you're in there, talk about something specific to that district, not just the generic talking points. And so my role in that, at least on the other side of these things, is when these people go in, they understand specifically what's going on in the district and how they can leverage that for a reason. If you can open up with, this is, you know, there are this many constituents in the district, this is what they think about this issue, and they happen to be on my side of the issue, and this is the reason why you need to sign on to my bill or give me a meeting or do whatever it is you need to do. If you bring the data specific to the district, we find, you know, that's when the members have to pay attention. That's when staffers like all of us at one point or another had to sit on the other side of that meeting. And when someone brought data that was specific to the district, that's when we perked up. When they were just bringing standard talking points that they were giving to everyone, that's when I wanted to get to the next meeting.
I want to ask something really quickly. You know,
go ahead, Yuri.
This news of the day thing, right? What's kind of driving the media cycle? There are policy experts in all different areas. People have interest in all sorts of policy and can go as deep as, as deep as they can, as their interests will take them. But there is a shared understanding of the news of the day of the people who work in Washington, D.C. You are expected to go into any conversation having a baseline knowledge of not only what is in the news today, but what is likely going to be in the news tomorrow, because it's happening that day. It's going on all around you. And to do that, this is where, the ABA can help you probably, because it is a mixture. It's a mixture of the morning tip sheets, along with just kind of the outlets during the day that just kind of give you an idea of what's going on, so that you don't sound tone deaf when you want to talk about one issue and the entire city is discussing something entirely different.
Just a quick follow-up. What's the best way to handle no during a meeting?
To push over the bookshelf and walk away screaming. No, I mean, it's like, what's that? The old famous saying is like, no permanent friends, no permanent enemies, right? Like the person you are aligned against right now, tomorrow will be, your biggest advocate and champion. And it's just like sales, frankly, right? Lobbying is sales. And having done commission sales myself, I became a much better salesman when I was able to accept no and not take it personally, right? It's not that big a deal, right? Like you can ask for something later on, but insulting people and threatening them or telling them that they work for you is always kind of the biggest turnoff. We know who we work for. This is why we work in this industry, because we care about the American people who we work for, and and we often get reminded that it's taxpayer dollars that pay our salaries, which is a very strange kind of argument.
And the other thing too is if you get a no, that's actually pretty valuable. How many of us have been in a meeting where you're not telling them yes, you're not telling them no, you're just, you're not going to really tell them what it is. Like my opinion would be is no is almost as worth as much as a yes, because at least you're getting some feedback, and you know how to iterate back. And like Yuri said, I remember some of these meetings where these people would come in and they remind you that you work for them and all that kind of stuff. And look, we're humans too. Sometimes that meeting got lost the second time around, or they got the meeting out in the hall. Like these are the types of things that, we all interact. Same way you would treat a waiter, you should treat a staffer.
That's the key thing too. And it's like, sorry, Leslie, do not get caught up in who you're meeting with or where you're meeting them. I think too many folks who do these fly-ins, oftentimes they get enamored with the idea of meeting with the member in the member's office as if that means anything, which it doesn't at all. I would rather actually have a meeting with the legislative assistant than the member, frankly, if you want to actually talk about getting things done and how things truly happen. Your time is much more valuable spending with the staffer whose purview is the issue that you're advocating for than the member. We all like to think that, the members they're the deciders. It's their name on the door. But at the end of the day, they are going to oftentimes rely on the guidance of staff. And so you should treat the staff like they are the member, because that is the person that you have to win over more so than anybody else. And if you have a meeting in the hallway or a meeting in the Rayburn cafeteria instead of the shiny conference room, do not let those trappings make you feel diminished. Do not pout about it. Don't complain about it. The reality of Capitol Hill for most people is a lot of people in a very small amount of space. And we do the best that we can with what we have. But don't get caught up in the superficial trappings, because at the end of the day, that has absolutely nothing to do with whether you're going to get the answer you want.
And I would just like double down on what Kurt said about the thinking of the staff as the member. That's so important. The number of times that people have been rude or, entitled, especially to schedulers. Schedulers have one of the hardest jobs on Capitol Hill.
Amen to that.
And it is constant, and just being respectful to the schedulers that you're speaking with, being happy and grateful for the meeting and the time that you're getting, and knowing that there's a lot of people out there who didn't. And I would say too, like you should treat any no in the same way that any member of Congress or any congressional staffer treats no as a chit to get a yes later. So, hey, remember when I really needed this thing and you told me no? Well, now's the chance that you have to like make that up to me, and you take a different issue and get a yes on that. And members of Congress do that all over the Hill. Staffers do that everywhere. And you should treat any no as a future yes.
Politicians don't like to tell anybody no. They
I know, like, don't say
want to
no.
get there for you.
Staffers via email, right?
Yeah, that's where Scott was spot on here. It's like, I can't think of a time where any member that I've been around actually gives it's not the member's job to deliver the no. It's the staffer's job. You know, it's the old adage, the boss gets to say yes, it's our job to say no. But if you do actually get a direct answer, that is incredibly valuable intelligence to have. And it doesn't happen very often. And I think part of it too is just having expectation management. You need to assume going into whatever meeting you're going into, you are not going to get a definitive answer. You know, this isn't television where you get a nice resolution at the end of the episode and go about your merry way. You're likely going to get, well, that's interesting. Keep us informed. Let's stay in touch. Make sure people get us all the information. We'll see how this plays out. You know, members' job is to try to create as many allies as possible without ever having to give away anything or give any commitments. And so you have to be prepared for that when you go in.
So that just reminds me of, you know, we've all, or hopefully we've seen that wonderful 70s video, How a Bill Becomes a Law. But look, it's a big deal, especially in today's environment, if you can even get a bill introduced. But three of you have worked on it, you know, and two of you presently work on committees, which are the real workhorses. What moves a bill from just being introduced to actually being considered?
Committees of jurisdiction, like members on that committee, right? Like you're gonna have a much harder time moving anything of substance through a committee with a member who's not on that committee. It's not impossible. It's like, you know, but if, you know, every committee is looking for bills to put on the docket that they've worked on with member offices. So, you know, right now my committee doesn't have any legislative jurisdiction. So we don't actually work on bills, but we do.
So you're useless here. Exactly.
But I did come over from Veterans Affairs Committee, and you know, we were looking for wins for our members, and sometimes we would give them to the members, something that the committee was working on or had met with someone and was trying to place, or they would bring us ideas and we would help them flesh it out a bit. But if our members had a good idea, we were trying to move it as quickly as possible. As long as it wasn't too political or painful, we were trying to move it as quickly as possible and then get it on the suspension calendar and get it moving. We wanted those bills.
And I would say, like, I think that there are, you know, what Yuri said was absolutely accurate. I would also make the point of, you know, working with, let's say that you've got a member that is your, you know, home district member, you know, making sure you're encouraging him or her to work with the chairman or the ranking member of the committee of jurisdiction. Having them do some of the legwork for you is really helpful. I know for the Foreign Affairs Committee, we kind of pride ourselves on being pretty bipartisan. And so when markups are set up, and which is kind of the way that bills make it through committee, usually to the floor, you know, when that happens, we actually spend a lot of time working with, you know, our majority on that, and they allow us to submit our recommendations, our asks. We get a fair number of Republican-led bills to go through our committee. And I know that that's not common everywhere. So really kind of keeping an eye as well on what is the committee or committees of jurisdiction here? How do those committees operate? And, you know, what are ways to kind of get things through? And a lot of that is just about having frank conversations with staff, and especially with committee staff. And, you know, this goes back to what we were saying before about members, which is that, look, members are great, but they meet with 100 people a day, right? On just a gigantic variety of topics. So it really is that staffer. And sometimes I'll sit on meetings and people will convince me that something is important, or they will convince my, you know, staff or my policy staffer for the committee that this is a really important issue. And I'm there every day needling my boss. Make sure you bring up this, like, we need to talk more about export controls. And so really kind of getting in and figuring out what that specific policy person likes, you know, how the committees work. I know that seems like a lot of extra legwork, but if you put in that extra work behind the scenes before you come in, I think that it would make a big, huge difference when you actually get a chance to sit down and speak with them. So the meeting itself is—
you're a press person. How does that work? So, I mean, and this is a question to all of you. you constantly monitor social media, let's say, right? Like, so how does that impact it as well? And quite frankly, like Leslie and Kurt, when you were on, back in the House, how do you drive that? And then Scotty, using your, data wizardry, how do you in turn either thwart or help their efforts?
I'll let Leslie and Kurt go first, and then I'll tell you how we thwart their efforts.
Well, the first thing I do is say, don't listen to the facts, science, or math. It's all a bunch of bunk. No, I think part of what has to happen for a successful, lobbying engagement is really, again, being in tune to what the member that you want to talk to is up to. And because of social media, we have a window into that all day, every day. I think about members on the Judiciary Committee, folks like Eric Swalwell, Ted Lieu, Castro. They're very vocal, they're very visible, they do their own Twitter. And you can tell who does their own Twitter and who has staff that's doing their Twitter for them. But with every tweet, you get an insight into what is on their mind. What are they reading? What are they paying attention to? What's important to them? And if there is a way that you can either time your meeting to overlap with one of those type of topics, or find a way to weave into your pitch effectively, a way to relate it to what they're talking about, I think that makes it way more effective and at least has a better chance of getting them engaged. The other thing is you have to approach every single initiative like a campaign. As a member office and as a committee, I want to know, if we do this with you, what are you bringing to the table? What advocacy are you able to do? What grassroots and grass tops can you produce? What endorsements do you bring for this initiative? What visible ways are you going to help be a partner in getting this to the finish line, other than just saying, we'd like you to do X, we'd like you to sign this letter, we'd like you to introduce this legislation or this resolution. What's your plan to move the needle forward and help the member get it across the finish line?
One thing I will say, at least it's interesting what Kurt said in grassroots, right? So my job is to provide intelligence on public opinion for either organizations or members, actual elected officials to use. And one of the surprising things that I think occurred to me after spending time in Congress is popular opinion is extremely, extremely important. More people, everyone thinks it's the person who gives 10 grand to a PAC or $2,700 or whatever it is. And I'm not saying those people don't have access, but 15 years ago, right, when Facebook was 2 years old, when I was a junior staffer in a congressional office, the member would consistently ask, how many phone calls did we get today? That's pretty unscientific, but that turned into how many Facebook messages did I get, or how many emails have I gotten, or whatever it is. And it's increasingly turning into, what are they saying on social media? What do the polls show? Whatever it is. And so what I would say is looking at that stuff through raw filters, like how many tweets. I mean, it's relatively proven fact that Twitter's pretty biased. It's an opinion. It has real people on it, but it's pretty biased compared to some other things. So it's basically getting that information and presenting it to either an organization or presenting it to a candidate in which they can properly make decisions off of that. And what I mean by that is it is important to these members how an issue plays in each district. I spend a lot of time going over a poll with a member saying, should I talk about the border or should I talk about healthcare? And they are legitimately looking at polling crosstabs and looking at what the qualitative research says to figure out what it is. Just like Leslie said earlier, her boss is focused on the border. Mike McCall in Central Texas, I get that 100%. You go up north to Minnesota, Pete Stauber's district, it's more about the healthcare. And so while Pete Stauber, Mike McCall might think the same thing generally on the border, Pete Stauber's reelection campaign is going to look a lot different than Mike McCall, and that's direct result to what the polling shows, the information he's getting when we produce social media reports, and just the on the ground what people come about when they talk to their office. And so my takeaway is members of Congress and members of the Senate really are responsive to popular opinion. It isn't as much as the $2,700 donor, the $10,000 donor. They are trying to get a bunch of different data sources and move from there and react to that. And so At least that's interesting from my point of view, because I'm usually on the campaign side because they want to know this information because they want to get reelected. I mean, at the end of the day, it's fascinating. Their self-interest is to do what popular opinion is amongst their district, because that's where they're going to get the most money, and that's how they're going to keep their job. And so, that's what I like to remind people is you may not like what your congressman's doing, but they are highly in tune with what their own district cares about. And if they weren't, they won't be there very long.
Can I ask how, and this showcases my own ignorance, let's say a member is trending on Twitter, though, how do they know how many people from is that available? Like, can they figure out, are these people who not even from their state, or is that actually possible?
The short answer to that is no. There are a couple of services out there that purport to do it, but largely what we do for Twitter is you do a large scale survey in the district, and you understand what Twitter's usage is, and then we can roughly estimate for them, same way the census estimates things, or the same way polling estimates things, like, hey, 10% of your district is participating in Twitter, or reads Twitter, or something like that. But no, there is no secret tool or special tool, no matter how much you spend out there, that can dissect every Twitter account and say this one's from Russia and this one's from your district.
Right. The thing about Twitter, sorry, Yuri, real quick. The thing about Twitter, and this is why I think members are so obsessed with it, is they know, though, every media reporter is on Twitter. And so if they are trending, it is a guarantee that not just the DC national media, but their district media is aware of that and will inevitably write something about that happening.
Yeah. So this is what my committee does, and this is what I've been doing on the Hill for a while, is trying to do a better job of gauging and creating more meaningful contact between congressional offices and their constituents, so that they understand the information that goes back and forth, so they hear one another. And every contact between a congressional constituent is somewhere on the spectrum of like low to high effort and low to high impact. And what we're all trying to do is somewhere meet in the middle, where I can do a medium low amount of effort, and it really has an impact on what it does, what my goal is. And that's an important point, right? You have to have a goal when you're contacting an office. The goal is not awareness. That is a tactic, right? Like flooding an office with a bunch of phone calls so they shut down their phones. That is a tactic. That is not a goal, because you didn't actually achieve anything except frustrate people, right? If your goal is to get someone to sign on to a piece of legislation, you have to look at it if you're looking through Twitter or Facebook, you have to think how that member is using it if you want to be effective to reach that goal. So in an office, we say Facebook is for constituents and Twitter is for driving a message in either the press or the academic world, or in your most active political community, like activists in your community, right? And so if you are trying to, as constituents, get your member to sign on to something, you are going to be more impactful approaching them on Facebook than you are on Twitter. Although it does get lost, but so does Twitter, right? If you are trying to get through to them through this, rather that this is a good policy idea in a field that you care about and are already a leader on, doesn't matter if you're a constituent or not, that is where you approach them on Twitter. Now, the big thing about social media is politicians like telegraph when they're paying attention online. They like put it out there, right? They say, I'm doing a Facebook town hall, I'm doing a Twitter tweet storm. They are begging people to engage with them. And that is when their full attention is there. And that is when everyone seems to disappear, right? So if you get them when they're asking you to come join them on Reddit for an Ask Me Anything, you have this captured audience, but it takes a little bit more effort for a much higher impact.
Wait, you're telling me politicians like attention?
When they want it. A couple quick things to this. So I think first, what Yuri said was really important. We treat Twitter and Facebook almost as two different entities, because Twitter is, as Kurt mentioned, us like messaging to reporters, us messaging to like the political people, And that's really more like what we use that for. Whereas Facebook, we feel like is more of a way to reach specifically our constituents. So I think that, you know, when you're posting stuff on each, that you should think about it that way. This is a really small thing, but members love it. As we've mentioned, they love to see their names everywhere. Is when you do meet with them, like post something about it, take a picture. They love that. If they know they're going to get pictures with you every single time and that it's going to be sent out to your newsletter or, you know, put up on your social media like accounts, I think that that really does matter. I would say with respect to how much like of an impact social media plays, it really like depends, right? It depends on the member, it depends on the office. Like I'm probably going to get in trouble for this down the road because I'm like violating the communicators like rules here. But like I hate social media. I think it's just a giant additional unnecessary step. I know that it is helpful and that I hate it so much. I hate that I have to be on it. I hate that we have to think about it and deal with it. I know that it can be helpful. But so for example, like I do monitor Twitter, but I'm on Twitter looking at reporters. I'm looking at news outlets and like our members to see what they're doing. I'm not necessarily checking in on our groups, but some of my policy staffers do use that. And they have specific, you know, reporters or specific groups that they follow. So that is helpful. So I just more think that sometimes there's this idea that social media is going to be the like key that fixes everything for you. And it's not. It plays an integral role. And as Scott, I think mentioned, or Kurt once said, you know, whenever something happens, my boss still does this. He comes in. How many phone calls did we get on this? How many people have like commented on this post or that post? Like, you know, what do people think about these things? He does care and he tracks, you know, how many times something he puts out is retweeted. You know, he asks us basically like, what are the big numbers? So all of that stuff does help, and it does help to bring attention to him. But you also have to keep in mind, again, I know that this is me being repetitive of just, it really depends on the member. It really depends on the committee, how important they take these things, and just making sure that you're using all the tools available.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
how do you drive that? Whether it's you, like if for you, Kurt, maybe somebody tries to enlist your help, or Scott, you know, I don't know if you get engaged with that, but Leslie, certainly if you want to drive a message, like what are the actual tactics there? If I get it, social media has its flaws and perhaps limited uses, but nobody would say it's useless. So again, like how do you, what are they called, trolls, to make sure it's actually organic and not just, you know, some what is AstroTurf
bot farm that Scott created?
Yeah. It's not that hard to tell. I hate to say it like that, you know, Twitter, it runs around saying, you know, throwing up their hands, we can't figure this out, it's so complicated. But for the longest time, I would say, here's a telltale sign. If they created their account in October of 2016, you know, and have 32,000 tweets and 17 followers, probably.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
well, it's funny, the social media stuff we spent, at least from our side, which is we end up helping either people get elected or we help people kind of advocate better to move more towards the authentic. It's, you know, 10 years ago was how much money you spending on Facebook, or how much you spending on YouTube, or how much you spending on TV, right? So it's all about paid advertising. Over the last couple of years, it's more about, can you find me, you know, influencer? When I say influencer, everyone thinks Instagram. And in the political space, it's who are the people who actually are going to touch 20 people in their neighborhood? Not that they're talking about politics every day, but who are the people that over the course of 6 months, they're going to influence 20 other people? And so what we try and do is we try and identify them on specific issues. If the member or the client or the candidate wants to talk about a specific issue, find the 10,000 people in the geography, whether it's in a district or a state or nationwide, who are advocates for the position already, and then make sure that they have the information so that over the course of the next 1 month or year, they are advocating for the position. Because at the end of the day, there isn't a 30-second ad that is going to be as effective as Leslie Shred sitting down with a friend and saying, hey, I think, you know, when it comes up on a topic, when it comes up over coffee or dinner or in the normal course of life, this is what I think. And I think that's where this is going is, you know, how do you identify these influencers? Like, for instance, I don't know much about the news industry, but I know if I have a question, I go ask Leslie or Kurt. I happen to know a lot about, math and polling, things like that. They would come to me and ask about it. And so you find those equivalent influencers or there's equivalent specialists, whether it be about healthcare, whether it be about immigration or border or whatever it is inside the communities, and then seed them that way. It's what's commonly referred to as grass tops. But as opposed to paying someone a $5,000 a month thing to write an op-ed and put it in the local paper, the 21st century version of that is find them, empower them, and bring them along so that they're talking to their neighbors.
And I used to work for a firm that did exactly that, and it was very effective.
Yeah, you've all been really generous with your time. So I just have one final question. It's just in the sense of, look, yeah, I get it. We all used to do fly-ins, that were physical in nature. What now has proven really annoying, quite frankly, and ineffective, that you would discourage, the ABA or any other association or group from doing?
Can I offer an encouragement rather there? Like the big
thing. Always the man of optimism, of course, here.
If you want, like either after or before, you do the same thing in the district, right? DC is fun and it's and it's the center of power, but continue the conversation and build those relationships. The most, like what Scott was getting, this is such an important point. The most powerful person that gets the meeting, gets the most attention, is not the person that tweets the most, and it's frankly not the person that cuts your boss a check. It's the known person in your community. It is the person that shows up to meetings. It is the person that runs a nonprofit. It is the person, who everybody knows and can't walk into a grocery store without getting hounded, just like a member of Congress. Become that person, and get to know the people in the district and invite them to come visit something, create a value add for them where they want to be your friends, and they are much more likely to spend some extra time with you and hear out your proposition.
And can I just throw out there too, that there's going to be a lot more opportunity for that in the district as well. And that's because everything is shut down in DC with everything that happened on January 6th. There's all these additional, on top of the COVID precautions, security precautions, getting in and getting in front of a staffer or getting in front of a member is a lot harder. So, if you're back in the district, use that opportunity. The members will be back home a lot more often this year than they will almost any other time, because we have all of this, committee work week stuff that's happening back in the district. And I would say one thing on it's not really a precaution, but just more something to consider, is that a lot of times if you have a specific issue you care about, yes, lobbyists are working on that. Yes, your members are going to be working on that, but a lot of it is also member to member, right? If you can get your one member advocate, that member talks to other members. Members want to be a part of whatever's going on, right? If I can get more members to sign onto a letter if I tell them they're the only one on the committee that haven't signed on yet. And the same thing goes here. And the problem we are actually experiencing right now is there's not a lot of member to member interaction anymore. They're not running to each other at events. They're not seeing each other on the floor. They're not going to conference meetings or caucus meetings, or even being all in person together for hearings or markups. And that has caused a significant problem for us, is the way that we communicate with members. But you should think about that too when you're finding your, quote unquote champions for the bills and the legislative priorities that you have, that you might need more than one, or that you might need to work with them to encourage them on how they are interacting with their colleagues on the Hill.
Yeah, that's such a good point. Yeah, Leslie, spot on. And I think part of it is being strategic in who you build partners with. There's a very big difference in lobbying a member of Congress who's 72 years old and lobbying a member of Congress who's 42 years old. And if I were you guys, I would be seeking out the 30, 40-year-olds. They are the ones who are, the members themselves are a lot more self-sufficient. They're a lot more independent. They are the ones who are actually doing their own tweeting. They are the ones that you can actually build a person-to-person relationship with, because they are more accessible. There is less barrier to entry, and they're just a lot more aware and using a lot more tools, platforms, and screens than the 72-year-old member. Number two, almost all of us view fly-ins as nothing more than an association wanting a tourism trip to DC and eating some steak dinners. Whether you're the largest trade association in electronics, whether you're the smallest trade association in healthcare, all of these fly-ins to us look pretty much the same.
We're gonna edit that out later.
and you're not necessarily doing anything differently that we haven't had done 3 times that day. And so the point about doing something in the district and building a relationship there in the member's backyard has a lot of value. And I would also encourage to build a relationship, if you can, with some of the district staff. If you can create avenues of advocacy from within the organization coming from the district, that does carry more weight. That is something that the staff in the Capitol office will pay some attention to, versus the bombardment of things that we're all getting in DC all day, every day. It carries a lot more weight if the district director calls me and says, hey, keep an eye out for so-and-so. We did a great event with them 2 months ago, like treat them well. Okay, like that's going to actually carry some weight with us. And they're going to get a little bit more of a priority experience than someone who hasn't invested the time in our own backyard.
And can I just real quick, and I know I'm interrupting again, but just really quickly for what Kirk said, like another thing to keep in mind about district staff as well is that, especially in a district that's the size of my district, but a lot of people have this big districts, like our LAs or, professional staff members on the committee, they might get, an hour, maybe 2, per day at the most, like in with a member, right? And more often than not, they might go 20 minutes for a quick meeting in and out, and that's it. But a member of Congress sits in a district staffer's car for hours often, waiting as they drive from one event to the next, looking for things to talk about. And they ask them, what's going on in the district? Who have you been talking to lately? And it's a really direct way to get in with the member, much more so than I think LAs or even PSN.
District director is often, not often, but more often than not, a personal friend, whereas the DC chief staff is more often than not a mercenary.
Yes.
Yep. Well put.
That's what we're going to title this panel.
Yeah.
Friend or mercenary.
Yeah.
So again, thank you all so much. Do you again, ladies first, do you just have any closing thoughts just for a few moments?
I mean, I think I just would go back again to politeness and manners and professionalism above everything else. You members talk and staffers talk. We all know, like, the lobbyists that we all secretly hate. We all know the fly-ins that none of us look forward to, but we have to do it because our boss makes us. And so do everything you can not to be that person, and be prepared for meetings. The number of times I've sat in on meetings where people come in and they've got nothing, no handouts, no ability to answer questions, no information on the district. I think those would be the 2 big things.
Well, Kurt could take a lot of that advice, especially about the manners. So Kurt, you're up next.
First of all, everyone knows I don't read, so I don't know what handouts you're talking about. I think that again, I think one of the most important things is making good use of your time and not caring about whether it's the member or in a conference room. The most important relationship you're going to have in association is with that member staff, not with the member by and large. And so always keep that in mind, and don't get preoccupied with the superficial trappings. What you care most about isn't getting a half hour with the member. I'd rather get an hour with a legislative assistant than 15 minutes with a member, frankly.
That's great. Scott, you're on deck, but remember, you are speaking to attorneys, so we've promised them no math. So please leave any of your real data analytics out of it.
Plus your billable hours.
Billable hours, yeah. No, I think my biggest takeaway is relevancy. At the end of the day, members of Congress, organizations, they're all about self-preservation. And if you understand selfishness and self-preservation, bring something relevant to them. I always come from a data angle. Tell them give them some data and why they should care about whatever you're talking about, whether it's polling data, whether it's, data related to how many constituents in their districts care about, because they are responsive to those types of arguments. Generally speaking, in my experience, emotional arguments to someone's, perceived better morality or righteousness or whatever it is, don't do as well as well, the majority of the districts polled, majority of the constituents in the district polled support this, or, these are the people who will be affected if you don't sign on to this, and here they are, here's what they signed, or whatever it is. Bring some relevancy to whatever time you get with a staffer or a member, bring some data, and you're going to see, I think you'll see better results.
Awesome. And Yuri, take us across the finish line.
Yeah, I'm going to tie in like a bunch of the themes of the day is that members want to make you happy, even the ones that you think are diametrically opposed to like your core human self, right? Like we don't agree on anything. There's no way they'll ever listen to anything I say. If you don't go in there thinking that you're going to win everything, but you still want to build a relationship with them, the person who doesn't agree with you fundamentally on one thing is going to want to try to go out of their way to work with you on something that they can't agree with you on. And so build that relationship, even if you think that they are not going to buy what you're selling, right? Like they might down the road, their taste or their appetite might change. So keep investing in it.
Well, thank you all so much. This was great. It was wonderful to see all of you. And yeah, have a great day.